Good evening and welcome to Current Issues. I'm your host, Hesham Tillawi. As we always say, welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Let me just make a couple of notes about my interview on Tuesday with Ambassador Edward Peck, who was the United States ambassador to Iraq. I looked over the interview we did with him. I think it was an excellent interview with a lot of good information of how things really work in the real world out there. And some people thought that he did not come out and say what he was supposed to say. I think he also said it right there at the end that he was sorry that he could not say specific things that I wanted him to say. But I really think that if you do watch the interview, it is obvious who he was talking about. And let's keep one thing in mind, that Edward Peck is Jewish. And therefore, he probably could not come out and say specifically who these people are that he was referring to when he said they were of very much the same orientation. And a lot of people out there, even Jewish people, would not want to use the J word in referring to anyone, even though, we use it here very cautiously. And but it's a fact, and sometimes people will throw this label of anti-Semitic. As a matter of fact, there are some Jewish out there who are referred to as anti-Semitic, even though they probably, supposedly, under the definition of anti-Semitic, supposedly all Jewish people are Semites. But as you have seen here on this program, that not all Jews, as a matter of fact, very few Jews in the world today, they could go back to Semitic people. But the term nowadays refers to anyone who, at first it used to refer to anyone who criticizes anything about anything Jewish. And then it moved into anyone who criticizes anything to do with Zionism. And then later on, it turned to be anything to do with Israel. If you criticize Israel, you will be labeled as an anti-Semite. So I think Ambassador Peck, who, by the way, is also labeled as as a self-hating Jew sometimes, but he was really very careful in how he phrased his words and his sentences, as to not be right out and say who the people he was. But I think if you do watch his interview, you will see exactly who he was referring to without even coming out and saying it. And also, as a reminder, that on Tuesdays we come to you at 7:30 and on Thursdays at 6:30 Central Time. I know it's a little confusing after you've been used to us having 2 hours, but I think on one day. But I think this is much, much better. We come to you twice a week, which we get to have twice the number of reruns. And so basically we come to you every day on the rebroadcast. It worked out fine. We enjoying the fact that we are coming to you twice a week and you're able to see us and don't have to take 2 hours out of your day at one time. This way it's much, much easier. And so we appreciate the fact that we are on 2 weeks or 2 days at it a week. My guest tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is, let me just give you his credentials first, and then we will go into who he is. He's not a mystery guest, but I'm sure you will enjoy him, as well as probably you will find him controversial at the same time. He's a graduate of Harvard and Yale in physics, so really he does not have much to do with politics, per education that is. As a faculty researcher at MIT in the early 1980s, he developed internet technology that has become pervasive. He created the GNU, which I have no idea what it is, Emacs X Windows interface, which is used by software engineers throughout the world. While at MIT, he was looking at the potential effects of the internet on the news and entertainment media. In the 1989-1991, he invented a technology nowadays called the VLAN router, which makes it extremely difficult for mega media corporations to control the content and information available to the public. In 1993, he extended his ideas to develop the concept of connecting private internets or intranets into to the public internet. During the time period from 1990 to 1993, he worked with an Israeli defense corporations like RAD, R-A-D. When he finally visited the Palestinian occupied territories in 1993, and afterwards, he was appalled by the brutal oppression of the native Palestinian population. He wondered how he had been so blind and why Americans remained so oblivious despite the copious online documentation that described Zionist crimes and that was now so easily accessible thanks to technology in whose development he had taken part in. He researched the origins of Zionism, the role of Hollywood, the power of Israel lobby, and the efforts of organized Jewish community to establish a network of control over all discourse about the state of Israel and Middle Eastern policies. Now, when we go to our guest, we're not really going to be talking internet and computer, even though he is an expert of that, and he was part in developing this media that we are coming to you now in some markets, and in other markets, of course, you are seeing us on cable TV, but throughout the world, you are watching us on broadband internet that my guest actually had a lot to do with the development of this particular media. Now, without any further ado, let me go directly to Joachim and Martilo. Joachim, welcome to the program.
Howdy.
Let me get into the computer thing and the internet just very briefly. Now, you said you developed a technology that would make it harder for other media corporations to control what goes on there. Tell me about that one. What is it, and how did you come up with that?
Well, I mean, let me explain the issue first. Basically, a lot of people who have content would like to control the quality of service so that, say, if MSNBC is broadcasting something, they'd have higher quality of service than a small guy who wants to broadcast his own content. So if you want to have high-quality content, you go to MSNBC and you ignore the small guys. In this way, by having a quality of service, the large corporations can control the Internet and guarantee that you only look at their messages. Now, what I was looking at was how do you build a very stable Internet with essentially full bandwidth forwarding of data. And what I created was a certain lower level of forwarding of data, which takes place beneath the Internet layer. And then you can, this is it's commonly called LAN switching, but it's even used now in the WAN, the wide area networking technology. So what you do is you build these very high performance networks a little bit below the Internet layer, and then connect them with the smallest number of Internet routers. And this gives you the ability to have much higher, actually often an order of magnitude higher performance. And that seems to, every time they go to a higher a faster technology into the internet, this higher level of performance makes it unnecessary to have quality of service. So that even though the large corporations would like to convince Congress to pass laws that would obligate quality of service in the internet, it never works, because the internet as it is always works just enough, just well enough. So
Very good.
we were actually discussing this at MIT at the time, and I thought it was a horrible idea to have quality of service. I wanted to find a way to get around it.
Very good. And we thank you for doing that, because we are able to go to a lot of people via the internet for efforts of people like you. Now, your work is in computers and technology, and you did work you worked in Israel for Israeli defense corporations, and then you visited the occupied territories, which is the Palestinian territories, and you had a complete change of mind about what is going on there. Tell me a little bit about that experience.
Well, I was actually helping the local Palestinian internet to expand its service. We were doing some contracts indirectly for the EU in infrastructure, and I was there when Goldstein attacked the worshippers at the Al Ibrahimi Mosque. And, I grew up in the United States, and I sort of had always believed that the Israelis wanted peace, and that it was just Palestinian blindness that prevented it from happening. But I also knew, I had visited Hebron during this time period, and I realized that the settlers in Hebron treat Palestinians very badly. And to say how to go. If there was really going to be peace under the Oslo framework, those guys had to be removed. There was no better time to remove them than in the time period after Goldstein committed his massacre. Yet, Rabin, when he was asked to remove them, said it wasn't time yet. Well, if it's not time then, when's it going to be time? And then I began to realize, I had Palestinians who were working with me in putting in the routers and working on building the Palestinian internet or improving it, improving the telecommunications infrastructure. And I went through checkpoints with them, and it's hard to compare. I talked to my family who lived through the occupation of Poland, say circa 1940, and when I described the things that I saw, he said, "Oh yeah, that's like Poland in 1940." And as I got to know more Palestinians, both those who are citizens of Israel and those who live in the occupied territories, I developed my comparison between Israel today and Germany during the 30s and 40s. And I would say, if you do a statistical comparison in terms of taking people's property, sending people to jail, abuse on the street, Israeli Palestinian citizens live under conditions comparable to that which German Jews experienced circa 1935 or 1937. I actually think the conditions for German Jews in 1936 was probably better than it is for Israeli Palestinians, those Palestinians that have citizenship, and that's because of the Olympics. I guess those are the Berlin Olympics. Palestinians that live in Jerusalem Palestinians experience conditions comparable to conditions that German Jews experienced perhaps in the first half of 1939. There was a tremendous decline in the quality of treatment that German Jews experienced in the run-up to World War II. And Palestinians in the occupied territories, it's like Poland, 1940. That's before the invasion of Poland, and that's before the mass murders began to take place during World War II. But it was quite atrocious. And if you listen to the Israeli radio, and I've actually done the comparison between the sorts of anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian statements that you hear in the Hebrew media, and what one would have heard in I've listened to the German recordings. I understand both languages from the 1939, 1940. You hear much more anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim racism than you heard in the German radio, say in 1940. It's quite striking, actually. I mean, part of this is probably because Germans don't like to hear such things. I mean, it's just a historically polite culture which doesn't like to hear that type of fanatic thing. But there is a definite, what I would call third-dish racist tendency in Israeli culture that comes out in their media. If you understand Hebrew, and people like Avigdor Lieberman are, ethnic, as extreme ethnic fundamentalists as one could find in Nazi Germany in the 30s, or say in Poland at the same time period.
Okay.
It's a political attitude that existed in Central and Eastern Europe in the 30s, and of course was brought to mandatory Palestine because that's the places from which Jews came. But the defeat of Germany essentially led to the demise of ethnic fundamentalism in Germany, and the Soviet Union essentially eradicated it in Poland. It's never been eradicated in mandatory Palestine or in the state of Israel.
Joachim, hold on a second for me. I want to just change the base here for a second. You have compared the experience, or the Holocaust experience, to the Palestinian Nakba, which is what happened to the Palestinians in 1948. You have said that people are miseducated about the Nakba and what happened there, because you see similarities there between the two. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, the Holocaust has multiple definitions, and when I read the Holocaust, the histories of the Holocaust, they usually start with Hitler's taking power in 1933, after the elections of 1932. There was no actual mass murders associated with Nazi Germany until 1941, with the invasion of the Soviet Union. What you did have was a desire to clear out the Jewish population, and in truth, it really wasn't the focus of the German Nazis initially. They wanted to get rid of the socialists and the other groups first, and basically deal with groups that were more of a threat than German Jews were. But if you look at the definitions that Raphael Lemkin tried to propose for genocide, he really does include trying to make it impossible for people to work, to physically destroy, which doesn't necessarily mean murder, a population in its territory. And that would certainly apply to what the Zionists were planning in the 30s, and they did in 47 and 48 in the territory that became pre-1967 Israel. What I see in the occupied territories is obviously a lot worse, and it seems more like you have to compare it to the types of ethnic cleansing and genocide that you see in the Soviet Union.
Now,
this is perhaps
Joachim, you have written that Arab and Muslim Americans need to make clear to other Americans how important the Nakba is to Arabs. Do you feel that Arabs and Muslims in the United States, they probably don't understand themselves what a Nakba is all about?
Well, I've attended, Arab mosques and Pakistani mosques, and I think that they actually do, have a strong feeling about the Nakba and the removal of Palestinians. I know that Pakistanis tend to equate what they see in Palestine with what they have seen in India, like the Gujarat riots a few years ago, where hundreds of people were just killed, because of the Hindutva, the radical Hindu nationalists.
Okay.
And you see hundreds of people being killed in riots all the time in the Indian subcontinent, and Muslims have been most of the victims. So I think they do actually understand quite a bit, how Palestinians have suffered.
Okay. Now you have done a lot of research on Zionism, the Jewish people, the Holocaust, what's going on with the Palestinians, and you have written a lot about what is going on in the Middle East, even though it's not really your area there, but you have, there are hundreds of articles written by you on the subject. Now, you have identified the Jewish people to be I guess different than what most people realize who the Jewish people are. Can you elaborate on that? Who do we consider as a Jew? What is a Jew today?
It has multiple definitions. If you ask a Muslim, he'll probably tell you it's someone who observes the Taurat Musa. It's someone who observes the law of Moses. In Hebrew it would be Torah Moshe. But this is not exactly how it worked in Eastern Europe. In the 19th century, in Poland, there was a Jewish population, or a population of people whose ancestors observed the Torah Moshe, who were becoming secular. They had their own culture and their own language. It was Yiddish. And there was a group among them who was trying to create a sense of Yiddish identity, which would be an identity separate from the Jewish identity of other people who were religiously Jewish, that didn't speak this language. And they were actually quite successful for a long time. You could argue that most of the Jews in Poland actually were, in some sense, involved with Yiddishism. The Zionists were a tiny group which, for various reasons, rejected this idea. But they were able to cannibalize the concept of a Yiddish ethnicity that was created by the Yiddishists and reinterpret it as a pan-Judaic ethno-national identity in order to make a claim to Palestine, which makes no sense. And the Jews in Poland, while they might not have been ethnically Polish, we don't find any evidence that they came from Palestine or that they're in any sense, Middle Eastern. I mean, it's like believing that the Irish, who are Roman Catholic, are Roman because the term for their religion includes the word Rome. Just because the religion has an etymological connection to, an area of the Middle East doesn't necessarily mean that they come from the Middle East or they have any connection beyond the religious, spiritual, or mythological in some sense. So you have essentially an autochthonous, indigenous Eastern European population, which for various reasons is trying to make a claim to Palestine that has no basis in fact. People study this and there just is no evidence. There is no archaeological, there is no historical, there is no textual, there is no onomastic evidence that connects Eastern European ethnic Ashkenazim to Palestine. They basically sliced and diced the Bible in order to justify stealing the country. It's
now,
not as extreme as...
When you lived in Israel, is that what the majority of Israelis are in Israel, Eastern Europeans?
The CBS, the Central Bureau of Statistics, has different ways of calculating this. I think during the time period that I was there, a lot of Russians came, and you can argue whether they're Jewish or non-Jewish. I would say there's probably about half come from Eastern Europe and Central Europe. The fact that they were able to convince Jews to come from Morocco, I mean, those people were essentially Moroccan Arabs. Do Moroccan Arabs have more right to Palestine than Palestinian Arabs? The fact is they're all foreigners that came to steal the country from the native population. It doesn't really make a difference whether they're ethnic Ashkenazim. What I would say is this: ethnic Ashkenazim created the ideology of Zionism, and they sort of foisted upon Jews of other ethnicities through various means. But the fact is, the people that are now considered Israeli Zionists, those people are interlopers and thieves. And Americans have to realize this. We're supporting basically interlopers and thieves. And as long as we do this, a large part of the world is going to be angry at us.
Okay. Yeah. Now, let's shift gears here to the United States and what is happening here in regards to the subjects that we're talking about. In the United States, you mentioned that Hollywood kind of started way back trying to portray the Arabs in certain positions. in a negative connotation. And as a matter of fact, you mentioned that the neocons started way back with Black September movie to basically show the Arabs as terrorists. And as a matter of fact, one of the detectives, I still remember that film, that the detective who finally saves the world or saves the people in the stadium was Jewish. So tell me about Hollywood and how do they portray the Arabs, and how is that affecting the way people think about the Arabs right here in the United States?
It's hard to find another group which is more demonized by Hollywood than Arabs and Muslims. I can probably count on my hand the number of films that are sympathetic to either Islamic or Arabic culture. It goes back a long time. I mean, there's the clearly Zionist films, which really started in the 50s, and in some sense are actually funded by the Israeli government in many ways. Exodus, which is, I believe, 1962, but the Israeli government paid Leon Uris to write it. Earlier hostility towards Arabs in the films, well, talkies begin in the 1920s, and that's when you begin to see the propagandization of the American Jewish or ethnic Ashkenazi American population with Zionist ideas. And maybe a little bit earlier, the Jewish press, the Jewish Zionist press in the United States, I guess, goes back to the 19-teens. And they're already talking about dispossessing or removing Palestinians. And, a lot of people in the movie industry were Jewish, had different degrees of association with the Jewish community. Oftentimes they would adopt Zionist ideas as a substitute for practicing. The Eastern European Jewish population, ethnic Ashkenazi population, historically is a community which had very little tolerance of deviance, of opinion within the society, within the culture. And, you still see evidence of that. When American Jews disagree with Israeli policies, they're accused of being traitors or of being self-haters. And Hollywood experienced the same sort of thing. And there's this other issue that there is the competition with the Soviet identity, too. So the people who ran the studios tended to be very conservative. They were much easier to go with, Zionist Jews than with pro-Soviet Jews. And if you look in the 30s, there have been books about this, Red Star over Hollywood. There was a big struggle to kick out essentially the Jews that were sympathetic to the Soviet Union, and that more or less left it to the Jews that were sympathetic to Zionism.
Okay.
So it's been going on for a long time.
Okay. And of course it's much worse now with all the everything is coming out of Hollywood is very much anti-Arabs, anti-Muslims, and I'm sure it's not going to let up anytime soon. Now, let's move into an area that is closer to the media here, or to Hollywood, which is the news media. And to me, probably I am having a hard time differentiating between what is called news media and Hollywood, because both of them are very much programming the American public to believe in one thing and one agenda, and that agenda is what we're talking about here. Hate the Arabs, hate the Muslims, and look good at other people, specifically the people in Israel, the Jews in Israel and elsewhere. How do you see the media playing this part in today's media? What can you tell me about what's going on in the media now when it comes to Muslims and Arabs?
Well, I mean, the Hollywood part is important because oftentimes it's very hard for Americans to distinguish fact from fiction. I've had people tell me scenes from Rules of Engagement or from Three Kings as if they had really happened. So there's this problem that people, you see in the movie, somehow it almost becomes fact. But I think that there is actually a more subtle issue. And when I watch television news or whether cable or broadcast, I often see people using the Israeli pronunciations of Arabic terms. like Hamas or Hezbollah. These are all Israeli accents. In Arabic you say Hamas. Well, you can do it better than me, Hezbollah. And I wonder from where is this coming? Because you look at it in English, you see Hezbollah or Hamas. And I looked into this a bit more, and I found that the organized Jewish community throughout the country provides media updates. They invite all the local press, which includes all the people who go on TV. And they will often, after they've indoctrinated them with the appropriate view on what's going on in the Middle East, and then these people begin saying it, then they'll actually ask such newscasters or journalists to come back and give talks about what they learned from the organized Jewish community. In these media updates that these Israeli Hebrew pronunciations of Arabic terms seem to become common, it seems like to be the first step of the indoctrination. It seems to be very thorough. I always see I live in Boston. I always see the various people from the Boston Globe and Boston Herald at these media updates.
Okay.
And I
now,
you get this broadcast.
Can you say what's going on now is similar to a certain degree of what used to take place, or probably still taking place now, where in the movies and in other Hollywood shows coming out of Hollywood, you would see black people portrayed as robbers and rapers and thieves, and then when you watch the evening news, you very much see who's getting arrested. It's a black guy who robbed a store or something. And is that what you're talking about when people having a hard time, or they can't really differentiate between Hollywood and reality?
When I say that they don't distinguish, I mean like they learn their history and their current events from the news. United Flight 93. That's become the fact. The actual scenes that we saw in that movie, there's no reason to believe anything like that actually happened in reality. We don't know how the hijackers behaved. We don't know how the passengers behaved. But that's become the fact. And
right.
The movie made it very clear that Islam was our enemy. If you watched it, I guess they had the hijackers, saying, Islamic prayers.
Okay.
We don't know if that's really.
Joachim, stay with me. We're going to go to the phones, and we're going to Canada. Go ahead, Ramsey.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Yes, sir. I just want to make a comment regarding what you said about the media. Actually, it's a known fact that Israelis, and I'm sure you guessed, you could elaborate on this, that the Israeli media people, they've learned actually how to do a media propaganda from the Nazis, because they knew that Hitler was so successful because his propaganda was so powerful, because propaganda is really important for politicians. And so I just want to ask you, guess the question. What do you think about what happened with the Wall Street Journal? Rupert Murdoch bought the Wall Street Journal and all these big media giants.
Okay. What do you think about Rupert Murdoch buying? Did you hear the question, Joachim?
Yeah, I should make a comment about the Zionists learning their way to deal with the media from Hitler. Actually, the Hitler style of media control was not much different from Louis Napoleon or that of the Soviets. This is just common in Europe, and the Zionists still use it. With regard to the Wall Street Journal, obviously he has agreed that the editorial page would remain independent for some time period. The Wall Street Journal editorial page is actually very, rabidly anti-Palestinian, anti-Muslim. I don't think you're going to see much change there. I'm worried more about the news section. And the Boston Herald, which is a Murdoch paper, actually was the major was a major tool in the campaign against the Islamic Society of Boston, when Boston Muslims, and not just the Arab Americans, but also the African Americans, wanted to build their own mosque from the start. The Boston Herald was a tool in that. I can see that happening with the Wall Street Journal. Murdoch made no promises about the news section, and it was the news section in the Herald that was quite evil.
Okay. So, I mean, it's not that the Wall Street Journal was not anti-Arab to start with, because I think it's just exchanged hands of probably the same ideology.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, the Wall Street Journal news pages were often had coverage that was reasonably fair. Daniel Pearl interviewed Qaradawi, and it was actually quite a sympathetic article, I have to admit. And I believe that when Daniel Pearl was kidnapped, Qaradawi actually tried to intervene on his behalf, partially, I guess, in gratitude for that news article.
Okay. Ramzi, you have any more questions?
I just have one more question. Has your guest written anything about the Jewish lobby? I'm just curious.
Oh, yeah, he did. What about the Jewish lobby, Joachim?
Thanks a lot.
I have talked with Professor Walt about this, and actually with some U.S. diplomats. I still hang around Harvard, and I'm not as sanguine about this. The Jewish lobby or the Israel lobby is not a lobby like other groups. There's this public face, which is AIPAC and the Israel Project, which are honestly advocating for Israel. And then there's this sort of covert face, which is the organized Jewish community, which organizes letter campaigns, tries to stop Palestinian speakers at Barnes and Nobles, and in truth, I believe violates their, the rules, the way nonprofit 501c3 organizations are supposed to operate for contributions to them to be tax deductible, maybe an issue of tax fraud. The Israel lobby, basically is advocating on behalf of another country. The farm lobby does not. And it seems, when I look at the things that they do, that they're willing to sacrifice American democracy. I listened to Ambassador Peck's talk, and he was not willing to basically suggest, to basically say that they were violating any laws. There actually are things in the U.S. Code. I believe Title 18, seditious conspiracy, and conspiracy against rights. I think that's Section 241. These things do look like serious crimes, and the Israel lobby is trying to serve a foreign power. Seems to become pretty close to seditious conspiracy, especially when members of the Israel lobby are serving as officials of the United States government.
Like, are you talking about like members of AIPAC?
No, I'm actually talking. I mean, there's actually a lot of crossover. People work in JINSA or Martin Indyk, people like that. They actually are either in Zionist lobby organizations or Zionist think tanks, and then they go serve in the U.S. government. So they actually become. I think Ambassador Kiesling in his book Diplomatic Lessons calls it clientitis, but it's not really clientitis. These people really, people like Wolfowitz, Pearl, Faith, Wormser, you look at what they're advocating, it's fairly clear that their primary loyalty lies to Israel. If they have to choose between Israeli interests and U.S. interests, they're going to choose a policy that favors Israeli interests, even to the detriment.
Well, of course, I mean, all we have to do is look at what took place in Iraq and see that their heart is in Israel, not in the United States. Now, when we talk about the Israel lobby, we're not just talking about AIPAC. Is AIPAC the largest and the most influential, or is it the one they just have it up there out there in the front?
Oh, it's there, but I worked for some of divestment in Somerville, which is a city next to Cambridge in Massachusetts. It wasn't AIPAC that jumped in to stop us from putting, in an attempt to try to stop us from putting it on the ballot. It was the JCRC, the Jewish Community Relations Council, which we spent about $12,000. They spent about $1.2 million. So to think that it's AIPAC, which is controlling discourse at the local community level, is a misunderstanding. In many regards, the network of control that these Jewish community organizations that basically masquerade as acting for cultural or religious purposes, but are actually working politically, those are the real control. They're actually working on your local politicians all through your states, so that when these organized letter campaigns work, when all those people get out to protest the politician who says we should be even-handed, it's not really AIPAC. AIPAC talks to the congressman. It's the JCRC, the JCC, Stand With Us, the David Project. Those are the ones that do it. A few years ago, AIPAC, this is actually one of the few cases where AIPAC actually works locally. They came to Harvard to try to recruit Harvard students that are going to be serving as interns for congressmen to make reports to them about their Israel policy. They're neither Republican nor Democrat, but they just wanted the Jewish students who were working for our congressmen to give reports back to them. I believe that they were assisted with in this effort by Stand With Us, Israel on Campus Coalition, and the David Project, and perhaps the Hillel, too. There's this low-level infrastructure that's almost beneath the radar because your typical political scientist doesn't want to look at those organizations. Caravan for Democracy. They want to look at the big ones like the Israel Project, AIPAC, JINSA. But I find the smaller local organizations actually a good deal more disturbing.
Now, Colin Powell made a statement and he said he was talking about the administration of George Bush in his first term. He said that it is full of the JINSA crowd. Can you tell us a little bit about who JINSA is and who was he talking about?
Yeah, I mean, that's Jewish Institute for National and Security. I forgot what the last
affairs.
But it's a Jewish think. It's actually an Israel, pro-Israel think tank, which National Security Affairs, Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs, which basically tries to develop or tries to present the U.S. government with a foreign policy, and it's mostly Jewish. So I believe there have been important non-Jews involved in it, like Cheney was, I believe, is on their board of directors and worked for them for a while in some fashion. And there are a few others. These think tanks, if you are in Washington, you need to get the lowdown on any particular issue, you go to a think tank that specializes in it. These pro-Israel think tanks are all over the place. I think it's partially an outgrowth of a cultural inheritance from Eastern Europe. In Eastern Europe, if you were Jewish and you were a merchant and not very learned in religious studies, you basically fund other people to do religious studies for you, and you get credit for it. Well, nowadays they sort of replaced the religion with sort of this, pro-Israel ethnic fundamentalism. So rather than funding what was called kolalim, they fund think tanks to basically spread the truth. It's not a religious truth; it's an ethnic fundamentalist truth around Washington, and they seem to be extremely effective. There were a couple of there's a small network of Arab think tanks in, I guess, around Virginia, to some extent funded by the Saudis, but I've forgotten what their name is. It escapes me. But Emerson and I guess Rita Katz, the site, the Investigator Project, and the Site Institute made a lot of effort to defame them and accuse them of being, of supporting terrorism, and they eventually were all shut down. So that not only do they have these pro-Israel think tanks, but another part of the organized pro-Israel lobby actually works to shut down anyone who provides another viewpoint, so that if there were any other voices, they get shut down or rendered unacceptable. And of course, in media, if they go look for experts, they learn from the media, the Jewish community media updates, who are the appropriate experts. It's actually a very impressive closed circle. So they shut down the competition, and the only people who will tell you where to go will direct you to those think tanks on national policy or defense policy. Very impressive.
Okay. Now, you wrote something. We're going to spend the next few minutes that left in the program on this, because it's very important. You wrote that the House is divided between two irreconcilable ideologies. One ideology is committed to American ideals, peace, justice, democracy, and human rights. The other supports racist, genocidal, undemocratic colonialism in the Middle East, and will destroy the fundamental principles of the USA to maintain the Zionist colony. A house so divided cannot stand. You said within 30 years we Americans will fight a civil war on this issue. Elaborate more on that. This is a very dangerous thought.
I analogize the condition today to the United States in the 1820s. And that's abolition. You know, there was part of the United States did not believe in freedom for all men. Some people were property. Mm-hmm. You know, basically African Americans were Africans were stolen by terrorism, force, and violence, brought to the United States, held by terrorism, force, and violence. That's like Palestine. Basically, you know, racists came from Eastern Europe and stole the country by terrorism, force, and violence, and they're keeping control of it by terrorism, force, and violence. In many regards, Palestinians are treated in some sense worse than African slaves were in the United States, because in the Old South, Africans had value. From a Zionist ideological standpoint, Palestinians have no value whatsoever. So what we have is an important part, section of the United States population, which doesn't believe in democracy for Palestinians, human rights for Palestinians, or anti-racism. These are fundamental American principles. We try to convince other people to adopt those principles. We can't sell them. You know, we can't sell these ideas to the rest of the world if we're hypocrites about it. And I believe that a large part of the United States population is beginning to realize this. You know, the fact is we can, you know, have investment resolutions in the United States. And I know that, relatively speaking, the fanatic pro-Israel population in the United States is not as large as the slaver population was in the 1850s. But nevertheless, you know, you're talking about a segment of the population which has immense capital resources, and it basically has more education than the rest of the population. You know, with more money and more education, you can do a lot of damage. So even though you're talking about a small fraction of the population, it has a drag on the rest of the country comparable to what slavery had on the United States in the 1850s, say.
Okay.
And it was an intolerable situation. The country split over it.
Okay.
I think we're beginning to get that way. I mean, certainly from the wars the 10-year wars that we see at Columbia, or the wars over Lawrence Summers at Harvard.
Joachim, stay with me. We have to go back to the phones. We only have a few minutes left. Let's go to Curtis. Go ahead, Curtis.
Dr. Tillawi, Mr. Martilo, I've really enjoyed this program. Dr. Tillawi, you probably realize by now I finally got high-speed internet access. And I really just wanted to make a comment, and that was to thank both of you, and especially you, Dr. Tillawi, for providing this kind of educational television for your viewers. I'm somebody that I do not watch mainstream television at all, and rarely do I watch any internet television. But now that I've had the opportunity to get back on and watch current issues, I've really enjoyed this program, and I'll be coming back. Thank you.
Appreciate the comment, Curtis. Thanks. Okay. So where do you think we should go from here? We only have a couple of minutes left. Does somebody needs to do more than what they're doing, or what is going on, Joachim?
Well, I think that the organized Arab American community and the organized Muslim American community have to start working together better than they do, and they have to begin to make arguments that work for Americans, which I think are pocketbook issues more than anything else. Because Americans are a little bit jaded about justice for other people at this point. There's been a lot of, they're just basically overwhelmed with, who should we support and who's just and right. But
But let me stop you here for a second. Americans are not interested in what we're talking about here. They're interested in what is going on with Britney Spears and what is going on with Paris Hilton. I guarantee you have a lot more people watching that kind of news than people who are watching what's going on in Iraq. I mean, there's still people out there still a lot of people out there who don't even know where Iraq is. So does it really matter if you go out there and you start educating people, or do you need to get to these policymakers just like the other side have gotten to them and work on that and forget about what's going on in Midtown America because they're not interested in politics?
Well, in Epic Encounters, Melanie Griffith makes the argument that popular culture basically defines your perception of national interests. And until Arabs and Muslims can make a dent in American popular culture, most Americans will perceive their interest as being associated with Israel, whatever AIPAC does. And there's also all these local Jewish organizations that are going to educate them. But there is one argument that I found to be effective. I believe that 1/8 of the national debt is due to American support for Israel, and it's going up. $2 trillion cost of the Iraq War, and that's not the full cost, because it's also the fact that it hurts, it diminishes American soft power. Within a year or so, probably the cost of Israel and Zionism to the United States will be 1/2 of the national debt. That's about, I believe, $50,000 per U.S. citizen. And that's talking about per family. I have a family of 5. That means that we spend $250,000 on Israel. I have a better use for that money. I'm sure most Americans do. That argument works in the Deep South, works in the red states. The cost of Israel is probably going to hit the exponential increasing phase. I don't want to pay for Israel. The vast majority of Americans don't. After that, then we can start talking about, changing popular culture and, what's right and just. But I'll tell you, if it agrees with their financial interests, Americans will find that the Palestinian cause is much more just.
Okay.
I'm sorry I'm cynical, but that seems to work.
Very good. Very good. Mr. Martilo, we are going to have to leave it at that as we are completely out of time. I just wanted to thank you for coming on the program.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we, like we always say, we bring them to you and you decide. Now, we bring you the education that you do not get somewhere else on any of the mainstream media. And also, as a matter of fact, in schools, I mean, look at what the Holocaust curriculum that is being taught at the school, as we have not had any bad situation in the world except what happened to the Jewish people during World War II. And but you don't hear about what happened to the Russians at the same time and at the same period, which a lot more people have died. Now, I'm not belittling what happened to the Jews in World War II. I think the facts are out there. You have to dig for them, though, because you will not find it in the Anne Frank's diary, and you will not find it in the Holocaust Museum. And if you want the facts, you're going to have to get out there. And my guest was one of the people who helped develop the Internet. And, you can go on the Internet to find the truth. You might have to cipher through it a little bit, but you can find it. The truth is out there, ladies and gentlemen, and you will be able to find it. We will see you next Tuesday, 7:30. Remember that. I know it's a little confusing. 7:30 on Tuesdays, 6:30 on Thursdays. And with that note, I'm sure we are coming at the end of the program. Good night, everybody. Go do the right thing. We'll see you Tuesday.
Greetings, and my name is Brother Darrell Muhammad. I'm the host of the Community Defender Talk Show, one powerful hour of truth in a day of falsehood. The Community Defender Talk Show is here to elevate the consciousness and understanding of black people. At the Community